Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to be looking at global forests through the lens of a massive ecological bank account. In this analogy, the trees themselves, the growing stock, are our principal investment. The natural growth they put on every single year, that's the interest we earn. And what foresters call yield, that represents our calculated withdrawals. Just like with a real-life bank account, if we don't track our withdrawals with absolute precision, we risk completely bankrupting the system.
To figure out exactly how we keep that massive account in the black, here is our roadmap for today. 1. Defining forest yield. 2. Why does yield matter? 3. Classifying forest products. 4. Measuring the harvest. And 5. The golden rule, sustained yield. By the end of this, you're going to understand the exact mathematical secret to preventing deforestation.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, defining forest yield, or as we're calling it, the withdrawals. First, we need to establish exactly what we mean here. So, our source defines yield as the actual volume of wood removed from a forest through harvesting operations during a given period. Notice the keyword there, removed. Yield isn't just the dead branches naturally falling onto the forest floor, and it's definitely not the total amount of wood just standing out there in the woods. It is the deliberate, highly calculated withdrawal we take from our natural bank account over a very specific, tightly managed time frame.
And how do we measure that? Well, cubic meters per hectare per year. This is literally the fundamental language of forestry. We're looking at volume per unit of area per unit of time. If managers don't track all three of these variables together, they're flying completely blind. They wouldn't know if they were safely skimming the interest or dangerously eating into the principal. This one single metric is the absolute foundation for making sure we aren't overdrawing the account.
Moving right along to Section 2, why does yield matter? The dividends. Let's look at why getting these numbers right is absolutely crucial for our survival. Honestly, yield calculations dictate pretty much everything about how a forest functions in our society. First, it forms the very basis of sustained management, guaranteeing long-term productivity. It also tells us the literal economic value of a forest. By knowing the yield, landowners and governments know exactly what the land is worth. Plus, it creates the essential operational schedule, telling crews exactly when and where to cut so we get the materials we need without bankrupting the forest future. Building on that, these yield numbers are the backbone of the forest working plan. Think of it just like strict financial forecasting in the corporate world. These metrics guide massive, long-term investment decisions. They tell a sawmill if it's actually worth opening a new facility, or let a community know if they can rely on forestry jobs for the next 50 years. And maybe most importantly, it helps regulate what we call the allowable cut, which is basically our strict, uncompromising daily spending limit.
Up next is Section 3, classifying forest products, different types of currency. Because when we make a withdrawal from our ecological bank account, it doesn't just pay out in one single type of cash.
We actually have three radically different types of currencies here. First, there's wood yield. That's your traditional merchantable timber measured in cubic meters, driving the commercial market. Second, we have non-wood forest products. Think resin, bamboo, medicinal plants, stuff that is absolutely vital for local community forestry. But that third column, service yield, this is fascinating. This is water regulation, biodiversity protection, carbon sequestration. These are ecosystem services that literally impact everyone on Earth. Even if you never buy a 2x4 in your life, you depend on the service yield of global forests for the very air you breathe. It's incredibly tough to quantify in raw volume, but its value is off the charts. All right, Section 4, measuring the harvest, the math of forestry. Let's shift from what we harvest to how we classify the physical operations out in the field. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast between expectation and reality. Gross yield is the raw, messy reality of cutting down a tree. It includes absolutely everything: the bark, broken branches, stumps, even the defective, rotted wood. It is wild to realize just how much of a felled tree is actually waste. In some operations, up to 50% of the total biomass just gets left behind. That's exactly why net yield is so critical. Net yield is the highly refined, usable volume that actually makes it onto a truck. It's only what's left over after you deduct all that waste. You simply cannot base economic forecasts on gross yield, or you're going to end up severely short on actual product. So, the chronological timeline of a managed forest usually starts with an intermediate yield. We often call this thinning, and it happens way before the final harvest. Foresters go in and actually remove the smaller or weaker trees. Why? Because reducing competition for sunlight and water actively improves the growth rate of the remaining high-quality trees. It's an early withdrawal that helps your main principal investment grow much, much larger. For step 2, the final yield. That's the massive volume you get when the main crop finally reaches full maturity.
Let's map these benchmarks back to our bank account analogy to really clarify things. Normal yield is our theoretical maximum return on investment. It's what a flawlessly stocked forest would produce under ideal conditions. But the real world is messy. So we have actual yield, which is our real-world return, usually a bit lower because of understocking or natural damage. And finally, the most important metric of all, the allowable annual cut. This is the ultimate, legally and scientifically permitted spending cap. It's the maximum amount we are allowed to take to ensure we don't break the ecosystem.
Which brings us to Section 5, the Golden Rule, sustained yield. This is the climax, the absolute philosophical and mathematical core of modern forest management.
Sustained yield is quite literally the holy grail of forestry. By definition, it's the yield a forest can produce continuously at a given intensity of management without impairing the productive capacity of the land. In plain English, it means living entirely off the ecological interest forever without ever touching the principle. If we manage for sustained yield, a forest can theoretically provide timber, non-wood products, and vital ecosystem services infinitely.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core concept. It all boils down to an incredibly simple yet deeply profound mathematical equation. Harmony is when harvest exactly equals growth. When what we take out is perfectly replaced by what the forest grows back. That is sustained yield. But if harvest is greater than growth, the forest is depleted. This is the definition of overharvesting. This is how you bankrupt the account, destroy habitats, and lose the vital carbon sequestration our planet desperately needs. The consequences of that bottom equation are totally catastrophic. Now there's actually a third, highly beneficial scenario here. What if we deliberately keep the harvest strictly less than the growth? Well, in this case, the growing stock naturally accumulates. The trees get bigger, the forest gets denser, and our ecological bank account actively builds wealth. This is the exact strategy used to restore degraded lands and build our natural reserves back up to a healthy baseline. So, the crucial point is, achieving that perfect harmony of sustained yield doesn't just happen by magic. It requires strict, non-negotiable physical conditions out there in the real world. The total forest area has to remain constant. We can't just lose land to urban sprawl. Harvesting must strictly equal net growth. We have to completely assure that new trees will regenerate after a cut. Soil productivity has to be actively maintained. And above all, no permanent damage can occur to the broader ecosystem. It is a massive, complex balancing act requiring brilliant science and immense discipline.
Which leaves us with this crucial final thought to ponder. Every time you walk into a wooden building, use a piece of paper, or just take a really deep breath of clean air. Ask yourself, as a global society, are we treating our forests like some magical, endless resource to be exploited? Or are we respecting the math, honoring the metrics, and treating them like the strictly managed, invaluable ecological bank account they truly are? The future of our planet depends entirely on our answer. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.